The day the contractor called about my late husband's workshop, I thought the only thing he'd found was a leaky roof. Instead, his quiet warning, "Don't come alone. Bring your daughters," tore open the last illusions my girls still had about their father, and stopped my brother-in-law from stealing everything Mark had secretly built for them. My name is Laura Bennett. I was 55 years old, recently widowed, and mother to two grown daughters, Julia and Hannah, when this happened. My husband, Mark, had been gone for 9 months. His body was in the ground. His workshop, I thought, had been buried with him. I was wrong. The call, "Don't come alone." Mark's workshop stood at the far edge of our property, a squat cinder block building with peeling blue paint and a metal door that stuck in winter. From the outside, it looked like any other outbuilding on our quiet cul-de-sac. On the inside, for 30 years, it had been my husband's church. He was a mechanic by trade, a woodworker by choice. He fixed neighbors' cars in the drive and neighbors' cabinets in the shop. Grease and sawdust were his cologne. After he died, suddenly, stupidly, on the floor of that shop with a wrench still in his hand, I locked the door and hadn't been able to turn the key since. I told myself it was because of the grief. Really, it was the fear. Fear of walking into the space that still smelled like him and realizing he was really gone. Fear of dealing with whatever half-finished projects and unpaid invoices lay inside, projects his brother Gary kept hinting were really more his than Mark's. By late autumn, the roof started leaking. At first, I ignored the dark stains spreading on the exterior cinder block. Then my elderly neighbor, Doris, rang my bell one rainy afternoon and said, "Laura, that roof's going to cave in if you keep pretending it isn't." So I called a contractor. His name was Ethan Walker, 30-something, quiet, the kind of man who looks at structures like they're talking to him. He'd done work for Doris and for our church. Everyone said he was honest. He came out, looked at the exterior, and asked for the key. My hand shook when I handed it over. "I haven't been in there since," I started, then trailed off. He nodded, not pushing. "I'll just take a quick look today," he said. "Assess the damage. See if anything's at risk. I'll call you later with what I find." That was at 10 a.m. At 1:17 p.m., my phone rang. "Mrs. Bennett." Ethan's voice was calm, but there was something under it. "Yes," I said, setting down the mug I'd been washing. "Is everything okay? Is the roof worse than we thought?" He hesitated. "The roof is fixable," he said, "but there's something else." My stomach dropped. "What?" I asked. "Is there structural damage? Mold?" "It's not that kind of problem," he interrupted gently. "I can't really explain it over the phone. But I will say this. You shouldn't come down here alone." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Is someone there? Did you find?" "I found something that belongs to you and your family," he said. "And given what I know from Gary, I think your daughters need to see it too." I went cold. "You've spoken to Gary?" I asked. "He showed up while I was working." Ethan said he'd been helping Mark with the business, that the workshop would be his now, and that if I needed to talk to anyone about the job, I should talk to him, not you. Of course he had. And I pressed, and he implied that whatever was in here was basically scrap. Ethan said carefully that he and the boys would handle sorting it. He asked me to give him the keys when I was done. My jaw clenched. "They're my keys," I said. "That's what I thought." Ethan replied, "Which is why I called you instead." He paused. "I've seen a lot of workshops," he continued. "I've seen a lot of family dynamics, too. What I found today, it's the kind of thing people fight over for years if the wrong person gets to it first. I think you, Julia, and Hannah should be the first ones to see it. Together." A mix of dread and curiosity roiled in my chest. "What did you find, Ethan?" I asked again, more quietly. He took a breath. A false wall, he said, and behind it, a safe. It was unlocked. Inside there are documents, cash, and letters addressed to you and your girls. Some of it contradicts things Gary has been saying. The floor seemed to tilt under me. My late husband, Mark, had been many things: stubborn, proud, sometimes emotionally distant, but secretive hadn't been one I put on the list until the last years of his life. In those years, the workshop had become more closed off. Lock changed, doors shut. Shop stuff, he'd say when I asked. Nothing for you to worry about. Well, now I need to worry, I said to Ethan. I'll call my daughters. We'll be there in half an hour. Take your time, he said. I'll keep the place locked until you arrive. And Mrs. Bennett? Yes. Don't tell Gary you're coming, he said. Not yet. 2. Before the workshop, our life, our loss, his brother. To understand why Ethan's warning made my hands shake, you need to know about Mark. And about Gary. Mark and I met when we were 21 at a county fair. He was leaning under the hood of a beat-up pickup, cursing at the engine. I was there with my church group, bored out of my mind. Need help? I'd call, mostly teasing. You a mechanic? He'd shot back, sweat streaking his temple. No, I'd said, but I'm a good listener. He'd laughed. We talked for 2 hours while the fair lights flickered on, and the smell of fried dough wrapped around us. We married 3 years later in a small church with wilting flowers and too much nervous laughter. We had our first daughter, Julia, a year after that. Hannah arrived 3 years later, all lungs and dark curls. Our life was not glamorous. Mark worked at a local auto shop by day and in his own workshop by night, slowly building a side business repairing small engines and doing custom woodworking for people who wanted a farm table but couldn't afford the prices in town. I worked as a receptionist at a dentist's office, then as office manager at the elementary school. We paid bills. We scrimped for a vacation every 3 years. We ate more casseroles than I care to remember. That we were content. Gary, on the other hand, was always chasing something bigger. He was Mark's younger brother by 4 years and his opposite in nearly every way. Where Mark was steady, Gary was restless. Where Mark saved, Gary spent. Where Mark saw his workshop as a place to make solid practical things, Gary saw every space as a potential stage. I'm going to own a chain of garages one day, he'd say, leaning in our kitchen doorway as Mark washed his hands in the sink. Franchises. Branding. Not this mom and pop nonsense. Mark would shrug. I like mom and pop, he'd reply. It pays the bills, and I sleep at night. You sleep because your wife handles the stress, Gary would laugh, looking at me. You snagged a good one. Bro, don't screw it up. I never liked Gary much. He had a way of smiling while he insulted you, so you weren't sure if you should thank him or slap him. But he was family, so when he showed up needing a place to crash after his third business didn't quite pan out, we made up the couch. When he asked Mark for just a small investment in a can't-miss used car lot venture, Mark loaned him money we didn't really have. I signed on the loan with him. Mark admitted later, shamefaced. He needed a co-signer, and Mom wouldn't do it. I thought. You thought he'd grow up. I'd finished rubbing my temples. The lot went under 8 months later. We were stuck with the debt. Gary moved on. Mark never brought it up. But after that, I noticed he started keeping more of our financial details to himself. Not lying, just leaving things unsaid. I'm handling it, he'd say when I asked about numbers. You handle the girls. It evens out. We fought about it, sometimes. Partnership means I get to know what's in the accounts. I'd say, and you do, he'd insist. In broad strokes, we have enough. We're not in crisis. Can we not do spreadsheets on Friday night, Laura? That had been our pattern. He cushioned me from some stress, and in return, I accepted a certain level of opacity. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work. Then, 3 years before his death, he got the idea to expand the workshop. People are driving further to get to me, he said, eyes bright. I'm turning work away. If I add a second bay and some better equipment, I could double what I bring in. I'd been wary. Expansion meant risk. Risk meant debt. Debt meant more vulnerability to Gary's brand of bad luck. We finally got the house paid off, I'd said. The girls are almost through school. Do we really want to take on more? It won't be like last time. He promised. I learned from Gary's mess. No co-signers. No loans I can't handle. Just a small line of credit covered by the new work. I've run the numbers, Laura. It's solid. He'd shown me pages of calculations. Enough that, reluctantly, I said okay. The expansion went ahead. The new bay filled with work. The new tools gleamed. Gary, of course, showed up more often. See, he crowed, clapping Mark on the back. Told you to think big. You and me, bro. We'll make this a real business. Yet. I'd muttered in the kitchen, watching from the window as they leaned against the workshop wall, beers in hand. They're just talking, Mark had said. You know Gary. All hat, no cattle. But I saw the gleam in Gary's eye when he looked at the upgraded space. And I knew men like him rarely looked at something nice without imagining their name on it. When Mark died, collapsed in that very workshop from an aneurysm that tore through his brain. So fast the doctors said he didn't feel it. Gary was the first one to bring up the shop. At the wake, standing too close, smelling faintly of whiskey and cologne. We'll keep it going, he'd said, draping an arm around my shoulders that I shrugged off as politely as I could. He'd want that. I'll step in. Help you with the business side. You and the girls, you don't have to worry. I'd been too numb to argue, but I remembered that over the next 9 months, he dropped by regularly, sometimes to check on us, sometimes to check on the equipment. Each time, his comments drifted more openly toward ownership. I've already got a few of my guys lined up to work in there, he'd say, nodding at the locked door. Once you're ready, we'll put my name on the sign. Bennett Brothers has a good ring to it, don't you think? We'll see, I'd replied, voice tight. He told Julia and Hannah, your dad always wanted me to take over. He said, if anything happens to me, Gary'll keep the shop in the family. The girls, deep in their own grief, clung to the idea that their uncle would preserve something of their father. I was not so easily convinced. Still, without proof of Mark's wishes, Gary's words floated unchallenged. We couldn't find a will. Mark had always said he'd get around to it. Apparently, he never did. The house was in both our names. That part was simple. The workshop, technically, sat on the same property. Legally, it was mine now. Ethically, I didn't know. Gary made sure to remind me, in front of the girls, that Mark had taken out part of the shop expansion line of credit in Gary's name, because I'm the one who'll be paying it off with my sweat now. He said it as if he were doing us a favor. When I mentioned possibly selling the equipment instead of continuing the business, he scoffed. That'd be spitting on his memory, he said. He built that place with his bare hands. He told me he didn't want his stuff auctioned off like junk. Guilt pricked my already raw heart, so I left the workshop door locked. I avoided making decisions. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to fight Gary and my own daughter's idealized image of what Dad would have wanted. Until Ethan called. Until the safe. 3, opening the false wall. Julia arrived first. She lived 20 minutes away with her husband and 2 kids in a starter home that still smelled new. She came in without knocking, eyes already anxious. Mom, what's wrong? She asked, shrugging off her coat. Your text sounded urgent. Hannah pulled into the driveway as I was explaining. She ran up the path, wind whipping her hair. Is it Gary? She demanded. Did he do something in the shop? No, I said. Not exactly. The contractor found something. A false wall. A safe. He wants us to see it together. They exchanged looks. Dad had a safe? Julia asked. Since when? I don't know. I admitted. I never saw it. Hannah frowned. So he had a whole secret compartment in his workshop, and you never knew? She said. That's not weird at all. Her sarcasm was armor. I recognized it. It might be something boring, I said. Invoices, tax folders, old tools. I just think we should be the ones to open it, before Gary gets any ideas. That, at least, motivated them. We walked together down the slight slope to the workshop. The air was cold enough to bite. Ethan was waiting outside, hands in his jacket pockets, expression serious. Mrs. Bennett, he said. Julia, right? And Hannah. He'd met the girls once, briefly, when they'd stopped by during his first roof assessment. Yeah, Julia said, shaking his hand. What's going on? He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Oil. Wood dust. The faint tang of burnt metal. Time stopped. My knees buckled a little. Hannah grabbed my arm. Mom, she asked. I'm okay. I lied. We stepped inside. The shop was almost exactly as Mark had left it. Workbench against one wall, tools hanging in careful order, wrenches, screwdrivers, saws, with faded outlines drawn behind each on pegboard, so he'd know where to put them back. A half-assembled wooden table sat in the center, clamps still attached. A rag, stained dark, lay on the floor near where he'd fallen. My throat tightened. Over here, Ethan said quietly, guiding us away from the worst of it. He brought us to the far wall, behind a row of metal shelving units laden with boxes of screws, cans of paint, and jars of bolts. I was checking for water damage. He said, the wall sounded wrong, hollow in one section. So I looked closer. He pointed to a seam. What had looked like a solid wall was actually a panel. Up close, you could see the faint outline of hidden hinges, expertly painted over. Ethan slid his fingers into a barely visible notch and pulled. The panel swung inward with a soft creak, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside, bolted to the concrete, was a small fireproof safe, door already ajar. Julia gasped. I didn't open anything without you, Ethan said quickly. When I realized what it was, I stopped. But the door was like this when I found it. I think someone, your husband, meant it to be easy for you to access, not Fort Knox. He stepped back. This is yours, he said. I'll give you privacy. Please stay, I said, surprising myself. If Gary shows up. Ethan nodded. I'll be right here, he said, leaning against the workbench, respectfully turning his gaze away. Julia and Hannah looked at me. Mom. Hannah asked, do you want it? My hands trembled, but I reached inside the cavity and pulled the safe door open the rest of the way. Inside were three things: a thick manila envelope, a black leather notebook, and a small metal lockbox, the kind you might keep petty cash in. My heart hammered. On the manila envelope, in Mark's familiar messy handwriting, were the words, for Laura and the girls, open if I'm gone. My breath hitched. Dad, Julia whispered. Hannah made a strangled sound. I slid the envelope out and set it on the workbench. My fingers shook as I opened it. Inside were several documents. The first was a letter. I recognized the looping L of my name at the top. Laura, it began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get around to making a proper will with a lawyer like I kept saying I would. It also means I finally ran out of Fridays to put it off. My eyes blurred. The words swam. Hannah gently took the page. Read it, I said, my voice too tight. She nodded, cleared her throat, and read aloud. First off, I'm sorry. She read, I should have done this when I was healthy, and we could joke about it. You always said I was stubborn. You were right. I know you hate surprises. It continued. So I wanted to make sure if anything happened to me, you wouldn't be at Gary's mercy or anyone else's. I've seen too many families ripped apart because nobody knew who owned what. Hannah glanced up, eyes glistening. The workshop and everything in it, she read, belongs to you and the girls. Period. I built this from nothing, but I didn't do it alone. You held the fort, paid the bills, made sure our daughters didn't eat ramen every night while I chased side jobs. Don't let anyone, especially my brother, tell you otherwise. A bitter laugh escaped me. Gary has helped me in bits and pieces. Hannah continued. He's good with ideas, bad with follow-through. I co-signed a loan for him years ago I still regret. If he claims I promised him the shop, he's full of it. I agreed to let him rent space here if he ever got his act together and actually opened that garage he talks about. That's it. He does not own anything here. Holy, Julia muttered, cutting herself off with a glance at me. I know you worry about money. Hannah read. You've always left the numbers to me, which was maybe a mistake. So here's the simple version. The house is paid off. We have some savings. The line of credit for the workshop expansion is partly in my name, partly in Gary's. My half can be covered by selling off old stock if you need to. Do not take out a new loan to make anyone whole, especially not him. Her voice shook on that line, but she kept going. Inside the small lockbox, the letter said, there is some cash and a list of accounts I set up in the girls' names. I didn't tell you because I didn't want fights about who got what. Each of them has something to help them start out. Tools for Julia's design career, savings for Hannah's teaching certificate, a little cushion, so they don't have to do every stupid, dangerous job I did. I stared at the lockbox, stunned. You'll also find copies of papers relating to Mom's house. She read. Gary leaned on her too. I helped her reverse some of that before she died. If he tries to pull that grab again with you, show him the paperwork and tell him to pound sand. I snorted despite myself. That sounded exactly like Mark. Finally, the letter said, I left a notebook. It has details, passwords, clients, even a few recipes because I know you always like my chili better than yours. Hannah's voice cracked. We all laughed through tears. Use what's here how you see fit. She read. Sell it. Keep it. Turn this place into a yoga studio. For all I care. Just don't let guilt or Gary talk you into decisions that leave you with nothing. I loved you badly sometimes. The letter ended. I know that. I wasn't always the husband you deserved. But I want more than anything for you and our girls to be okay when I'm not there to screw things up in person. Love. Mark. Silence filled the workshop. Dust motes floated in a shaft of light from the grimy window, like tiny ghosts. Julia wiped her cheeks. He knew, she said. He knew exactly what Gary would try. Hannah shook her head in disbelief. And he still didn't go to an actual lawyer, she said, voice wobbling. Typical. I laughed then, a raw, broken sound that felt oddly good. Typical. I echoed. Ethan cleared his throat softly. I'm sorry for intruding, he said, but I think you needed to see that sooner rather than later. Thank you, I said genuinely. We turned to the lockbox. It was unlocked too, key taped to the bottom. Inside, there were stacks of neatly folded 20s and 50s. Not a fortune, but enough to be a decent emergency buffer. There were also 3 smaller envelopes. One labeled Julia, one Hannah, one Laura. Is this real? Hannah whispered. Only one way to find out, I said. We open them. 4. What Dad left his daughters. In Julia's envelope was a short note and a set of keys. Jules, he'd written. You always had the eye for turning junk into something people wanted to buy. I've been stashing away good lumber and hardware for years for you. The back storage room, behind the green tarp, has your name on it. Sell it, use it, turn it into that online shop you're always talking about. You're better at this than I ever was. Don't let perfectionism stop you. In Hannah's envelope was a bank statement for a modest savings account in her name. Henny, he wrote, you said you didn't want to be stuck in an office like your mom. You wanted to teach. I talked big about real jobs and trades, but the truth is, I'm proud you want to shape kids' brains. This should cover your certification program and some rent. Use it to live a little while you learn. Don't let anyone tell you teaching is less than. It sure wasn't for your sisters at school. Hannah clapped a hand over her mouth. He set this up, she whispered. He never said. In my envelope was something different. A list, accounts, insurance policies, a note at the bottom. Laura, I know you hate this stuff, but future you will hate present me if I don't at least try to lay it out. P.S. If Gary tries anything, call this number. He'd written Sarah Rivera's name and phone number. My brows shot up. You knew her? I asked Ethan. He shook his head. No, he said, but I recognize the name. Good estate lawyer. Works with a lot of small business owners around here. Thank God for stubborn men who do one thing right before they die. Julia flipped through the rest of the manila envelope. Mom, she said slowly, pulling out another sheet. There's more. It was a handwritten addendum of sorts. If for some reason it read, this letter ends up in a courthouse because Gary or anyone else tries to drag you there over intent, consider this my sworn statement. The shop, its contents, and any business good will belong to Laura, Julia, and Hannah, not Gary, not anyone else. He may say otherwise. He will be lying. Underneath, Mark had signed his full name in that careful way he used for official documents. Witness line blank. It wasn't a legally drafted will, but combined with the location, the context, and the supporting documents, it was powerful. Powerful enough, at least, to blow a hole in Gary's narrative. Hannah's mouth set in a thin line. I want to be there when Gary sees this, she said. Me too, Julia added. Ethan cleared his throat again. There's one more thing, he said. Over here. He led us to the workbench. Underneath, bolted to the wall, was a metal clipboard that had been flipped face down. He turned it over. On it was a printed sheet labeled Workshop Rental Agreement, Draft. It had Mark's name and Gary's and lines outlining rent, responsibilities, and a very clear clause. Lessee, Gary Bennett, acknowledges that he has no ownership interest in building, land, or equipment. This is a month-to-month rental agreement only. At the bottom, Gary's signature was half scribbled in, as if he'd started to sign, then thought better of it. Mark's line was blank. He was going to make it formal, Julia said softly. He just didn't get to it. But he knew, Hannah repeated, he knew Gary would try to claim ownership. And he did what he could to stop it, I said, in his own chaotic way. For the first time in months, the confusion I'd felt about what Mark would have wanted began to dissipate. He wanted us secure. He did not want Gary in charge. 5. Turning the tables on Gary. We didn't have to wait long for Gary to show up. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when a contractor's truck is parked outside a workshop Gary had begun to think of as his. He rolled up in his battered pickup 20 minutes after we opened the safe, music blaring, wearing his usual combination of work boots and too expensive sunglasses. He hopped out, saw us all standing there, me, Julia, Hannah, Ethan, and smirked. Well, he said, strolling up like he owned the place. Family meeting, huh? About time. You finally ready to talk business, Laura? Ethan moved, slightly, positioning himself between Gary and the workshop door. Gary noticed. His smile narrowed. What's the contractor doing here? He asked. This is a private conversation. He found something, I said, something we needed to see. As a family. Gary's eyes lit up. You mean the equipment? He said. Yeah, I saw you brought in a roofer. Good call. We'll need this place in top shape once Bennett Brothers Garage opens in the spring. He winked at the girls. I'll put your dad's name in big letters, he said. Honor his legacy. Julia and Hannah looked at each other. Hannah folded her arms. You mean you'll put your name in big letters and pretend Dad begged you to take over so you can feel important, she said flatly. Gary's face tightened. What's your problem? He demanded. I'm the one offering to keep this place afloat. Otherwise, the bank will take it when your mom messes up the paperwork. The bank doesn't own this property, I said calmly. I do. For now, he muttered, until taxes catch up. He tried to step around Ethan. Ethan didn't move. Hang on, he said, tone polite but firm. Before you go in, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Bennett, and her daughters need to share something with you. Gary bristled. Who asked you? He snarled. You're hired help. You patch roofs. You don't run family meetings. It's okay, Ethan, I said. We've got it from here. Ethan nodded and stepped aside slightly, but stayed within earshot. We guided Gary into the workshop. He glanced around like a man inspecting his new kingdom. What's all this about? He asked, feigning boredom. I walked over to the workbench and picked up Mark's letter. We found a false wall, I said, and a safe. Inside were documents from Mark about the shop. Gary's eyes flicked to the manila envelope. He swallowed. So, he said, he probably left instructions for me to keep it going. Instead of arguing, I handed him the letter. Read, I said. He skimmed the first few lines, expression smug. When he hit the paragraph about the shop belonging to me and the girls' period, the color drained from his face. That's not what he told me, he stammered. He told you what he always told you, Hannah said, what you wanted to hear. And then, when he was alone and working, he wrote down what he actually believed. Gary flipped the page, eyes scanning for something, anything to support his story. He didn't find it. He slapped the letter down. This isn't legal, he said. It's just a note. Anyone could have written that. Anyone with his handwriting. Julia asked, in a safe behind a false wall only he knew about. He never signed it in front of witnesses. Gary insisted. It wouldn't hold up in court. You'd be laughed out. We might, I conceded, but combined with the lockbox contents, the rental agreement you half signed, and the trust accounts he set up for the girls, a judge would see a pattern of intent. You'd be the one laughed out, Gary. His nostrils flared. What trust accounts? He demanded. None of your business. Hannah shot back. Julia held up her envelope. You don't get to be mad that Dad thought of us, she said. You got plenty of his help when he was alive. Remember the used car lot? That was an investment, Gary said. We were all supposed to benefit. We benefited by learning never to co-sign anything with you, I said. For a moment, he looked like he might lunge for the papers. Ethan cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, if you touch those documents, I will call the police. I'm a witness here today. Don't make this worse for yourself. Gary shot him a look of pure hatred. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He spat. All of you, painting me as some villain. No, I said, we're just finally seeing clearly what's been there all along. He laughed, short and bitter. You think you can run this place without me? He said. You don't know the first thing about mechanics. You'll sell it for pennies. Mark would roll in his grave. He's the one who told us to sell, if we needed to, I said, tapping the letter. He wanted security for us, not a monument to your ego. Gary opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around the workshop, the tools, the half-finished table, the dust. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction. Fine, he said. Do what you want. When the money runs out, don't come crying to me. You've never been the one we cried to, Julia said softly. You were always the one we cried about. He flinched at that more than anything else. Without another word, he stormed out, slamming the metal door behind him. We listened to his truck rev and speed away. Silence settled again. For the first time, the workshop felt like ours. Not his, ours. What we did with the workshop. You might expect the next part of the story to be a triumphant, and we turned the shop into a booming woman-run business that made us rich. Life is rarely that neat. Julia had 2 small kids and a job as a freelance interior designer. Hannah was finishing her teaching credential and working part-time at a bookstore. I was a tired widow with a decent pension and a mortgage-free house that suddenly felt too big and too full of ghosts. None of us had the bandwidth to become full-time mechanics, but we had options. Options we hadn't truly understood we had until we read Mark's letter. We could rent the space to a trustworthy mechanic who understood the boundaries, sell the equipment, and convert the shop into something else. Use it as a community workshop if we could find funding. We sat around my kitchen table that night, the manila envelope between us. What do you want to do? I asked my daughters. Julia chewed her lip. I kind of like the idea of a makerspace, she said. A place where kids can learn basic skills. Woodworking. Fixing a flat. Stuff Dad always said schools should teach. Hannah rolled her eyes affectionately. Of course you do, she said. And I'd love to help. But that's a big project. Grants. Liability. Insurance. We could start small, Julia insisted. Weekend workshops. See if the community college wants to partner. Hannah looked at me. What do you want, Mom? She asked. You're the one who's lived next to that building for 30 years. I looked out the window at the dim outline of the workshop. For a long time, that building had represented Mark's distance from us. His escape. His secrets. Now, it held his last real attempt to do right by us. I want to stop feeling like a guest in my own life. I said slowly, this letter, this shop, they're reminders that I'm not just the wife who gets taken care of or the widow who gets managed by other people's decisions. I took a breath. I don't know yet what we should do long term, I said, but I know what I don't want. They waited. I don't want to leave it locked because I'm afraid, I said, and I don't want to turn it over to someone who will hang Mark's name on the door and then live out his worst habits in front of our neighbors. Hannah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. So we don't, she said. In the end, we did start small. We hired Ethan to fix the roof properly and add some insulation. We cleared out junk, laughed and cried over old projects, and carefully inventoried the tools. We found a local mechanic, Maria, a single mom with a solid reputation, who'd been renting a cramped bay across town. I always envied this place, she admitted when we showed her the shop. Your husband was a good guy. Quiet. No BS. We worked out a rental agreement, fair market rate month to month, with a clear clause, a real lawyer-approved one this time, that she had no ownership interest in the building. She paid on time, kept the place clean, put a small framed photo of Mark on the pegboard near the wrenches. He left room for women in here, she said, nodding toward the letter we'd told her about. Least I can do is honor that. On Saturday mornings, when Maria didn't have a backlog of jobs, she hosted Kids and Cars, hour. $10 sliding scale. She'd show kids how to check tire pressure, what the weird lights on the dashboard meant, how to change a wiper blade. Hannah brought her students sometimes. Julia helped design flyers and a website. I made muffins. It wasn't a franchise. It wasn't spectacular, but it felt right. As for Gary, he tried a few more times to stir up trouble. He called, leaving long voicemails about family loyalty and Mark's legacy. He hinted to my mother-in-law that we were pushing him out of his own brother's story. He even showed up at the shop, once when Maria was there, trying to intimidate her. I'm the brother, he'd said, puffing up his chest. This is really my place. Maria had stared him down. Your name's not on the lease, she'd said, and if you step 1 foot over that line, she pointed to the threshold. I call Laura and then the cops. In that order. He left. Eventually, the calls slowed. Men like Gary look for easy marks. We quietly removed ourselves from that category. 7. What "don't come alone" really meant. Looking back, I think about Ethan's phone call a lot. "Don't come alone," he'd said. "Bring your daughters." At the time, it sounded like a practical safety suggestion. He'd found something volatile. He didn't want me to face it by myself. Now, I hear another layer. He was saying, don't try to carry this on your own the way you've carried everything else. Don't let people talk you into decisions in private that affect others in the dark. Bring your girls into the room where the truth is so no one can rewrite it later. For most of my marriage, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who filled in the gaps, smoothed over Mark's stubbornness, softened Gary's bluntness, shielded the girls from adult stress. I thought that was my job. Sometimes it was. Other times, it kept the people around me from ever having to face the consequences of their choices. Mark's hidden letter was the first time he'd really tried to do that himself. He was, in his own flawed way, saying, I know my brother. I know our patterns. I know if I leave without a map, Laura will be the one everyone pressures. So here is a map. Imperfect, messy, but clear on this one point. Gary does not get to own the thing I built on her land with her sacrifices. He died before he could make it official. Ethan's call gave us a chance to honor the spirit of it anyway. If we'd let Gary get there first, he would have found the safe. He would have interpreted the letters. He might have lost a page or two. By the time we saw anything, it would have been filtered through his narrative. Instead, we saw it together. There was no room for maybe you misheard or you're remembering it wrong. We all read the same ink at the same time. Sometimes that's the closest thing to justice a family gets. If you've ever lost someone and then felt like everyone around you suddenly had a script for what they would have wanted that somehow always benefited them, I hope this story resonates. If you're the one who always makes room at the table, in the budget, in your schedule, for people who assume you'll take care of the details, I hope Ethan's words echo in your mind when it matters. Don't come alone. Bring witnesses. Bring allies. Bring your own lawyer, if you can swing it. Bring your kids into the truth before someone else brings them into a lie. What Mark left in that hidden safe wasn't perfect. It wasn't notarized or stamped by a judge. But it was enough. Enough for us to say with more confidence than we'd had in months, this is ours. Not in the selfish, grabbing way Gary thought. Ours, as in the women who held this family together. The daughters who worked, studied, and grieved in the shadow of that workshop. The widow who cooked meals, paid bills, and now gets to decide what happens to the building that stands 10 yards from her back door. The best revenge we took wasn't suing Gary or shaming him publicly. It was living in a way that made his worst assumptions about us untrue. He saw us as weak. We chose to stand together. He saw the workshop as his next conquest. We turned it into a place where kids, boys and girls, learned that tools and trades weren't just for men with egos and unfinished dreams. He thought we'd crumble without Mark. We didn't. We mourned. We read. We decided. We fixed the roof. We propped open the door. We invited in someone who understood what real work looks like and what real respect feels like. Life is still hard. Grief still sucker punches me when I walk into the workshop and catch a whiff of that oil and pine smell. The roof will probably leak again someday. But when it does, I know this. I won't be standing under it alone, wondering what secrets might fall on my head. I'll be there with my daughters, because the lesson that day in the workshop wasn't just about walls and safes and brothers who overreach. It was about this simple truth. Some doors are too heavy to open by yourself. That doesn't mean you leave them locked forever. It means you pick up the phone, you call someone you trust, and you say, "Don't come alone."